All right, how you guys doing today? We about to hop into part two of the greatest evidence for Christianity, presented by Mr. Cold Case Christianity themselves, because it's two people on the channel. Jimmy Wallace, don't think I forgot about you, and Shay Warner. All right. First things first, though, just want to make sure I light that video up. You know what to do. Exit full screen, scroll a bit, like it, then full screen it back on. You feel me? Now let's pick up where we left off.
Noticed how your gospels don't match? They're not precise. Give you an example. How many women run to the tomb of Jesus on the first Sunday? How many women? Yell it out. 2? 3? Depends on the gospel. Really? How many angels are waiting for the women when they get there? Come on. 2? 1? It depends on the gospel.
Where there's 2, there's always 1.
That's true. How about this? How about this though? Okay, smarty pants. You know, next week he's going to have you'll see a dialogue with Mark Middleburg on the stage, right? He's going to be doing the same thing to Mark he's doing to me now. Anyway, but think about, how about this though? There's a sign over the cross of Jesus. I think it has 6 words, 5, 6 words. 4 gospels record that sign. Do any of those gospels agree with each other about what the sign says? No. And you trust those gospels. You trust them as reliable eyewitness accounts when they have so many variants and disagreements between the Gospels. I've had professors challenge their students in college. And by the way, if you are in the age of 15 to 30, the culture sees you as low-hanging fruit. They really do, because they know in that age group, about 60 to 70% of you will walk away from the church in those years. Only a third will ever return. We are shrinking as a group, and it's happening in that demographic. And I remember one guy said, I left because my professor simply challenged me to read the resurrection story, the nativity, the Passion Week, in all 4 gospels and just compare them to one another. And when I did that, I realized they are very different. And he walked away. Well, I'm here to tell you something, okay? When I read that for the first time as a skeptic, I was like, wow, I'm starting to think this is actually true information. Because if you've ever worked with witnesses, you know one rule of witnesses. They never, ever agree. Ever. It could happen 5 minutes ago. Someone could come up here and I used to run an experiment in front of my youth group. Someone would run up, slap me on the side of the head and run off the stage. And I would ask everyone on a card, don't talk to each other, just tell me, what did you just see? You wouldn't believe the variation between the accounts. They just saw it together. We were all together. They couldn't even agree on the sex of the perpetrator. Think about that. But did the event really happen? Of course. What is my job as a detective is to figure out why you say it one way and he says it another way. So I always say this, if there was a robbery in this room and I wanted to know, what was the guy wearing? You think I'm going to ask him? No way. I'm going to ask her. Because he's going to say, I don't know, like a t-shirt maybe? Dark t-shirt? She's going to say, oh, no. It's like an Izod t-shirt. You know the one that has the band that's tight right about halfway here? And the limp collar shirt, not the straight collar shirt, 3 buttons stuffed right around here. What is that about? Well, she just bought 3 of those for him last week for some, and so she actually gets it. That's why you ask her that question, right? And if they disagree on the description of the shirt, it doesn't mean that there was no shirt or no suspect. It just means that they're coming at it from different perspectives. My job is to figure out what the perspectives are. So when I read the Gospels and I saw that these things would sometimes leave out details, like Luke will say, Jesus is in front of Caiaphas at a trial, and they're testing Jesus, so they think, you think you're divine, you think you're God? How about this? So someone slaps him and says, tell us, Jesus, who prophesied? Who slapped you? And I'm thinking, how hard is that? I would just look at the guy and say, you did, you moron, right? I mean, how hard is it to tell you who slapped me? Because Luke doesn't describe the fact that Matthew describes that before this whole thing started, they put a blindfold on Jesus. Luke never mentions it. So his statement's actually kind of confusing until you get the other eyewitness account. And that's what it is in our cases all the time. I see this in my professional work constantly. One confusing statement clarified by another witness. And you see this all the time.
And that's a form of corroboration, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's just the nature. So what bothered me was I was not a believer, but I was reading the Gospels. And when I saw that kind of thing in the Gospels, I was like, this looks suspiciously like real eyewitness accounts. Because look, if I'm trying to create this fiction, I'm going to work that stuff out.
Yeah.
Right? I'm going to work that stuff out so there's no question about it. But if you work real cases, you see that those little, warts and pimples on the account are still there. And that's what I was seeing in the eyewitness accounts. It just struck me as I should probably go a little further with this.
And the fact that these were unplanned, apparently. I mean, they fit together
yes.
In an unintentional
way. So, for example, why is it at the feeding of 5,000, I think Jesus asks Philip, where can we go to feed these people? Philip is a minor character in the Gospels. Jesus never asked Philip for anything. He's going to ask Simon, right? He's going to ask somebody, he's not going to, his top 3, he's not going to ask Philip. Who the heck is Philip? You just never get from that account why it is he would ask Philip until you read the other accounts and realize they're in Bithynia, where Philip was raised. The one person who could actually answer that question would be Philip. But you'd never know from that first account. You had to kind of do your homework, right? And see, why do these eyewitnesses say certain things? And when I started to do that, I was like, wow, this stuff's bugging me.
And literally, we were talking about that today. We were actually in Bible study for the group of Mark, or in the book of Mark, and they were talking about they're slapping Jesus and they're spitting Jesus and they're yelling out prophesy. And I asked, I was like, why are they saying prophesy, right? And to be clear, I have read all the Gospels and I have read Mark, and I knew the story of why they were spitting and slapping him, but I'm like, why are they yelling out prophesy? And the lady that was running it was like, oh, because they blindfolded him and they're saying prophesy, saying like, oh, tell us who hit you. And I was like, oh, they meant prophesy like that. Because beforehand it was talking about how they were telling conflicting testimonials based on they couldn't convict Jesus because they're saying, well, we heard him say that he would knock down his body or knock down his temple in 3 days and build it up with something that's not built by hands. But their things were confusing, and they couldn't convict him based on that because they were telling conflicting things. And I'm sitting there like, if these people, somebody's up there lying saying he didn't say that, because he really did say that. And if they said that, they'd be able to convict him like, oh, he's that's terrorism. He's trying to break down the temple. But somebody went up there and said, he didn't say that. When it's like, but he really did? Question mark. So you got too many people lying about him to where it's convicting the truth. Too many people telling the truth where it's conflicting the lies. And that it was just a really sketchy thing. But you could even see back then when they were trying to convict people, they would do it based on witness testimonials. But what they really did convict him was based on what he really said and saying that he's the Messiah and the Son of God, right? But even to that point, like you said, Matthew wrote that they put the blindfold on him and they were saying, who hit you? Luke just saying, who hit you? And then Mark saying, they're saying, prophesy. And you're sitting there like, prophesy on what? Because you're confused. Because you're like, well, they're hitting him and slapping him and they're just saying prophesy, but they don't even believe that he's who he says he is based on the prophecies that he was saying. So I'm like, why are they saying prophesy? If they would have knew that it was a prophecy that this would be him, then why are they confused? But you're missing so many of that links. And then we was talking about something else where I mentioned that in John, it said he did so much stuff that it couldn't even be written in books about him, right? Like he brought up in the video, because there's so much stuff and he only did his ministry in that 2 to 3 year period. But in those 2 to 3 years, we have so little, but he did so much that it could be written about books about him. Because even think about when somebody goes and gets deployed to war, right? Because people love to bring this up, how we interview like Holocaust survivors X years amount of happened, World War II people X amount of times after it happened, because there's still new stories coming up, one, or they just like to hear the retelling of those old stories. And even about the old stories, they might get told in a different way 30 years versus the 70 years after it happened, right? Because that's just that stories evolve, and you might remember something that you didn't think happened then, or you might say something that didn't happen the first time because you just forgot about that little instance because somebody asked the question a little bit a different way, and it really brought that neural connection out to where you could explain that other happening, right? But in that 2 to 3 year period, it makes sense that we don't have all that, because it's like different people seen him at different times, and they would have to scrunch up every single person that saw him, because his whole thing was going place to place and doing this, right? So when people are trying to collect these things, right, they could go place to place, but a lot of the witnesses are dead, or they might be talking to the kids of the actual witnesses and their kids telling something, and they're like, oh, I've heard a little bit about that story, where we don't know. So I think in a way of saying, right, the greatest evidence, right, it's the greatest evidence is that they are conflicting. He would argue, right, that he would argue that that's one of the greatest evidence, because it's like, regardless of whether they agree, the fact that they don't agree points more to it, because you have these people noticing different things about what happened, right? Oh, I saw two angels. Oh, I saw only the one angel, right? Because you might think of, if what's his face, if John and Peter got there at different times, right? Maybe Peter got there after John, and John did see two angels, right? I don't know what books they're in, but right, maybe John saw two angels. One of the angels left when he saw somebody show up, because he's like, oh, people are here, we don't need to be here anymore, right? So maybe one of the angels left, and then by the time Peter got there, because we know we got there after John, because John had to say he did, maybe Peter only saw one angel because the angels were starting to depart, right? Or maybe he was looking, he wasn't looking where John was, and John ran to one of the angels and Peter ran. Regardless of the fact, there was probably two, because somebody claimed to have seen two and somebody else may have just seen one. Or versus the women, somebody may have got there when the women were leaving. Truth is, you don't know. But what you do know is that there probably was an angel there, because two people seen they saw angels, at least one angel, right? There was probably women there, because three people claim to have seen three different amounts of women there, right? So chances are there was an angel, chances are there were women, chances are the body was in the tomb, chances are he got crucified, chances are he really lived. right? Because why would there be all this debate about these certain things that happen in a dude's life if the dude didn't even live in general? I think that's the main point. Well, we don't know if Jesus really healed this dude, or if he did this to this, or this to this. But the thing is, he was with whatever that situation was. Chances are he was there. Ain't nobody disagreed about that. Just like I really loved his point when the one video we watched together, he was saying, how many people died on the Titanic? This post said this many, this post said this many, this post said this many. Regardless of the fact is, people died, the ship sunk. Nobody disagrees about the ship sinking. Just like nobody disagrees that he was really living. Nobody disagrees that he was at that place. Nobody disagrees that he was crucified. Nobody disagrees that his body wasn't in that tomb. Nobody disagrees that the 500 people seen him. Right? Right. And I think that's once again, that's just the beauty of it. We don't 100% know, but based on the evidence, he was living, he was walking, he was breathing, he died, his tomb was empty, all for the remission of our sins. All right, that's gonna be the end of the video. Hope you guys hope you guys have yourself a fantastic rest of your day. Peace.